I originally wasn't going to do this week's Paint Your Style, but after looking at the paints in my collection that I hadn't had a chance to do full paintings with, I decided it was the perfect opportunity to use my Art of Soil paints that I got back in February. I got all of these in their second sale, which is when they sell slightly damaged palettes at a reduced cost. So the palette I have up top is their 12A Walnut palette, and the ceramic palette holds all of their broken mini exopods. I ended up getting 2 bags and have just divided them by color. Unlike my normal pieces, the colors won't be listed below. I'll just leave a link to her shop because I haven't gone through to figure out which colors I got in my grab bags. I started by swatching all of the colors that I have from her shop because I haven't actually got them all swatched out on a single card, and I wanted to know exactly what colors I had at my disposal. As with last week, I'll insert an image of what the painting challenge was, but it was pretty much as far out of my comfort zone as you can get. I thought that the boat from last week was as far as we were going to get out of my comfort zone, but I was wrong. In this case, I decided to just have fun and that it wasn't going to be perfect, and just accept that. It was a lot of layering colors and playing with color, and I think that's one of the things that makes these challenges so much fun, is that A, I don't have to pick what I'm painting, and B, it just is a good opportunity to play with color. So I marked out the body, and then I marked out sort of roughly where the bird's head was going to go. It wasn't exact, but it was close enough that I had sort of an idea of where colors were going to get placed, and then just went in and started layering up more and more colors. I used a lot of heat to dry in between layers. I was really impatient, and this paper likes to stay wet for a really long time, which is great in some things, but in something like this where I knew I wanted to build up a bunch of layers, it was less than helpful. So there was a lot of using a heat gun to dry layers, and a lot of making sure that I kept looking at the original reference image so that I didn't lose sort of the shape and the color plan of the bird. Because I wasn't super familiar with these colors, I tried to avoid mixing as much as possible, though the longer I painted, the more comfortable I got with these colors in the color palette, and the more I did mix. It's always interesting to paint with new paints for the very first time. In this case, I have used the paints on their own, so I've used the blues in this set, but I haven't actually used all of the paints together in something. And so working with them together gave me a much better appreciation for the colors, and also gave me a better appreciation for how to layer them. I think that I did a much better job layering when it came to the background than I did on the bird in the beginning, though I do really like the final result of the bird's body. I decided to go in with pretty much every blue and sort of tealy aqua color I had and just sort of layer them all together. The goal being that I'd sort of get like that speckly, hazy, out of focus background. One of the things with using a textured paper like this is that it makes it almost easier to get that sort of background. The paper sort of naturally leans to giving you that sort of non-flat background, which in something like this can be really helpful, but can also be frustrating in other pieces. And so I decided to use that to my advantage. I also decided not to go in wet on wet at first. I did change that partway through, and so around the bird isn't wet on wet, but as you get towards the edges, it is becoming a wet on wet piece. I do really like that because I think it like pulls your eye towards the color around the bird more, and I'd stuck with more of like the light blue and less of like the hazy gray blues around the bird. Once again, the finger is the biggest asset with doing backgrounds like this, much like in last week's boat. I probably use my finger way more than most people do with doing textured pieces, but I think it's a great tool because I don't always have the brush I want. Branches like this are always a guesstimation of where to put them, and I sort of just went for it. It's at a different angle than the original picture, but I think it does still work. And I did end up going in and adding more detail with a slightly darker color of brown, just to sort of give it more definition. The leg was also equally awkward. I wasn't quite sure where to put it in. It was at a very interesting angle in the piece, and then I screwed up. The eye is too big, and so I very quickly try and dab it off. I did realize that's not working, so I go in with a wet paintbrush, which works better, and then I use a heat tool to dry the page so that I can dry the eye again. I darken the beak because it's not quite purpley pink enough. In the original image it was quite pink, but I don't have any colors from Art of Soil that are quite pink enough, and so I just sort of went very purple with the beak. The bird also had these like black little feathers around his eye. My bird was at a slightly different angle to the one in reference, so my black feathering was slightly off and I didn't really like it, so I ended up taking most of it off. Luckily I found that these paints really wet and were pretty easy to lift, which you don't always find with natural paint, so I was quite happy about that. And then there's the finished piece. I was actually really happy with it. It's the first bird I've ever painted. Challenge pieces like this are always quite interesting, because the short time limit and the fact that they're often not an image that I'd pick myself means that I oftentimes have to figure out a way to paint them in a way that doesn't frustrate me. And so it's always an interesting experience to try and paint with a time limit. So in this case, the time limit's a week to complete the challenge, and I find that quite enjoyable.